Did you know Mitsubishi holds a world record in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most victories of a Dakar Rally between 1985 and 2007, winning 12 times in 32 years. That's nearly half, and a lot of that is thanks to this. This is essentially a race car SUV, but it didn't start life that way.
The first model of the Pajero was introduced as a prototype at the Tokyo Auto Show in 1973, with the second prototype following in 1978. And finally, 8 years after its initial prototype, the first production version of the Pajero lineup debuted in 1981.
And it was built after Mitsubishi saw Toyota's Land Cruisers and Nissan's Patrols frolicking through the mountains, having all the fun climbing through the streams and rivers and over the rocks. Mitsubishi wanted in on the fun.
So they built a short wheelbase, four-wheel drive utilitarian vehicle with a handful of pretty underwhelming 4- and 6-cylinder engines.
The second generation of the Pajero was all new and introduced some pretty trick tech features like Super Select 4-wheel drive, multi-mode ABS, which meant ABS would be fully functional in all 4-wheel drive modes, which was pretty groundbreaking stuff at the time because braking with a locked center differential requires entirely different braking parameters than with an unlocked diff, and electronic shock absorbers, which allowed the driver to choose between a soft, medium, and hard setting depending on road conditions. Now, Mitsubishi Pajeros were already competing in the infamous Dakar Rally, an off-road endurance event covering up to 9,000 miles across a plethora of extremely difficult terrain in the T2 and T3 categories. T2 was a modified production class, which were vehicles almost identical to those sold to the public, and T3, which were fully custom, non-production prototype vehicles. But in the late 90s, towards the end of the production run of the second generation Pajero, Mitsubishi decided to create a vehicle with the sole intention of winning the T2 class. So Mitsubishi added independent rear suspension, which was not found on the road-going variants, but was the basis of the later third and fourth generation Pajeros, and a modified 6G74 under the hood. And now, a real animal was born.
But in order to participate in some forms of motorsport, a car must be homologated in order to race, like the Plymouth Superbird, the Lancia Delta Integral, and the BMW E30 M3.
So, to participate and take the crown in the T2 category meant Mitsubishi was required to produce road-going versions of their new design. And in 1997, the Pajero Evolution was born. Not only coming in first place in the T2 production class, it came in first place overall.
Shinizuka, the first Japanese to win the Dakar, and a historic top 4 places for Mitsubishi.
Like, it won the whole thing, beating even the purpose-built prototype cars. That's an incredible achievement. The Pajero Evolution is based on the 3-door variant of the second generation Pajero, and it looks like it's doing 100 miles an hour over rocks while it's sitting still at the McDonald's drive-thru. That's thanks to its body-colored widened fenders and off-road bumpers with increased approach and departure angles and double fog lights, its side sill extensions, that massive hood scoop on a lightweight aluminum hood, and a very interesting rear spoiler. We'll call it that. Kind of makes the Evo look like it's wearing bat ears or something, doesn't it? You agree, and now you can't unsee it. Now you're gonna think of bat ears every time you see a Mitsubishi Pajero Evo, except for you're probably never gonna see one because they only built 2,500 of them. But what's under the Evo's rally-inspired skin is even more important.
The car's track was widened by 125 millimeters at the front and 110 millimeters at the rear. The Evo had 4-corner independent suspension. The rear received a bespoke multi-link long travel suspension setup, with the front getting double wishbones. All that bolted to a reinforced frame with skid plates underneath to ensure the underside was protected in the absolute harshest of environments. Now power, that was also important. So under that lightweight aluminum hood, sat this. A 3.5 liter naturally aspirated dual overhead cam MyVec V6, featuring a dual plenum variable intake and gasoline direct injection. It pumped out 276 horsepower. That was because of the gentleman's agreement. You know, we've talked about this. Everything was limited to 276 horsepower, or they had to advertise just 276 horsepower. So in reality, it's like 300 horsepower. And 256 foot-pounds of torque.
It could spin either the rear wheels or all 4 wheels through this 5-speed automatic transmission and 2-speed transfer case, which was pretty cool because you could shift into 4-wheel drive on the fly at speeds up to 62 miles an hour. And the interior here, with its dual Recaro racing seats up front with their funky pattern, give another indication that this thing was built to go fast. Anywhere. But it wasn't the fastest thing on the planet, don't get me wrong. It could hit 60 miles an hour in the 7 to 8 second range and hit a top speed of 130 miles an hour. And while many cars on the road can hit 130 miles an hour, very few can do that sort of speed on a loose surface. It's hard to describe how this thing drives on the road. It's difficult when this is like an off-road racing SUV and we're driving on regular roads, on pavement. This isn't the environment that it was built to tackle. It'd be like testing a snowmobile in a river. But it's very hard to accurately tell you how this thing handles because it's unlike anything I've ever driven. The suspension is wild the way it makes this little 2-door SUV handle. 3 doors technically. It's like it has body roll, but it stays level all at the same time. I have no idea what I'm saying. It's wild. It feels almost like it has rear wheel steering. And while it's not really that quick in today's standards, I mean, we're kind of spoiled now, but for a 90s SUV, it's not bad, but it's crazy when you're really pushing this thing around corners, even on pavement, how it feels. I mean, it's like it's staying level, but the suspension underneath is just going wild. You feel like you're gonna roll over, but in a way you feel completely planted to the road. This is weird. This is awesome. 2-door SUVs, especially from the 90s, they lean a ton, they're very unpredictable. I say this because I daily drive a 2-door SUV from the 90s. It's so predictable and so controllable, it's nuts. It leans a little bit, but it feels like it should be rolling over when it's not. It doesn't feel like you're going to push it over or anything. It's crazy. This is really cool. And when you slow it down and you're driving normally, it just feels like a regular old SUV from the 90s. Power's decent. For the 90s SUVs, this was very top end, almost 300 horsepower. But at slow speeds, it's relatively civilized. There's really nothing that sticks out at you, except for the seats being very, very well bolstered, hugging you in. Well, thank you guys very much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy motoring.